Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to welcome you all to our second World Religious Traditions program with the Interfaith Brotherhood and Sisterhood Committee of Bergen County. My name is Adam Ozdemir. On behalf of the Peace Islands Institute, I would like to express that we are pleased to host this introductory program series. Today's presentation will be on Passover. We have three speakers today, and I'll pass it over to Gail Windelglass for the presentation, and she will be introducing our other presenters as well. Gail?
Hi, good afternoon. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce Rabbi Dr. Wally Green, who will begin our presentation with some of the history of Exodus and the Passover, and talk about the 10 plagues and the time in the desert, and some of the Seder symbols. And then I will take the next segment and talk about the Seder table and the Seder plate and some of the symbolic foods, etc. So it is my pleasure to pass it to Rabbi Green.
Thank you, Gail, very much. Good afternoon, everybody. The Talmud tells us that whoever expounds about Passover and goes into it in great detail, the more praiseworthy it is. In the Seder itself, there's a story about a number of rabbis in Bnei Brak who stayed up all night long studying about the Exodus and about the Seder plate and what it symbolized. We're not going to spend all that much time. We'll try to be as concise and as brief as I can. Basically, what Passover is, it's the beginning of Jewish history. The month of Nisan, the month in which Passover occurs, is the first calendrical month, first month of the Jewish calendar, which means that Rosh Hashanah takes place in the 7th month of the year. But nevertheless, Jewish history begins when the Jewish people were liberated from Egypt to become a nation. Up until that point, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all their descendants, what you might call ethical monotheists. But Jewish history began the moment they left Egypt and ended up at Mount Sinai 49 days later, 7 weeks later. Liberation is sometimes messy. Liberation isn't always without pain. The Jews certainly suffered for several centuries under Egyptian slavery, and the Bible describes how they increased the slavery. Not only did they enslave them, despite the fact that Joseph had saved Egypt from terrible famine, they forgot all that. A new king arose who didn't know Joseph, or made priests who didn't know Joseph. And they made slaves out of the Jewish people. They made them make brick, they made them make mortar, and then they made them find their own straw and their own clay. It's quite possible the pyramids in Egypt were built by some of those Jewish slaves. So they suffered. And when Moses shows up to bring the Jews out at God's command, he and Aaron, his brother, bring 10 plagues, and the Egyptians suffer. So liberation is sometimes not without its pain. Not that I sympathize very much with the Egyptians, what they did, but the current plague that we are hopefully coming out of soon gives a little bit of a taste, a tiny, tiny taste of what a plague is really like. And they had 10 of them. They lasted a very long time, and each one was worse than the other. But one of the fascinating things about Passover and the Seder and the Haggadah, which is the text that is used at the Seder, is that Moses is not mentioned. His name is not mentioned anywhere in all the biblical verses and all the rabbinic commentaries. Moses is absent because this is a festival of the people. The people emerged from slavery into freedom, and the only type of service that they were involved in is their service to God, and that they were taught while they went through the desert for those 40 years. They emerged from what was then an institutionalized persecution of the people. It began with something very simple. When Jacob came down to Egypt, after Joseph had saved the country from famine, Pharaoh greeted them, yet they had to live in their own little ghetto outside the place called Goshen. because the sons of Jacob were shepherds, and shepherds were abhorrent to the Jewish people because they worshiped sheep, one of their deities. So that persecution began in a very subtle way when they weren't even allowed to live. Maybe that was the first ghetto, but they had to live outside. And Moses comes, frees them, and there's a biblical command mentioned many times that we have to remember the Exodus from Egypt. We say it 3 times a day in our prayers, and we say it over and over again with all types of explanations and elaborations at the Seder. The word Seder means order, and there are 15 parts to the Seder. It starts with the Kiddush, the beginning, and then it goes through a whole range of different ritual parts: washing of the hands, eating of the parsley, the matzah, the bitter herbs, all the different things. And the most important part is a part of the Seder called Magid, which means to describe, to discuss all of the events that took place in Egypt and how they were interpreted and what the representation of it is to us. It isn't by any means a dull recitation of fact. It's meant to engage everybody sitting around the table. That's why, as Gail will show you, there are so many symbols, each one representing something different in that history that led to the liberation. It's also something that we understand. Children can't sit for a long time. It's hard. So we introduce into the Seder certain elements to keep the children involved. We have them ask questions. And if they don't know their own questions to ask, we give them some questions to ask. And then it's at a certain point when nobody's looking, sometimes children will steal a piece of the matzah called the afikomen, where you can't conclude the dinner without eating the afikomen. And it's usually a time for negotiation. The children know, what do you want to give me if I give you back the afikomen? And it's something to engage the children to keep them involved. I just want to interject a very key little story. Many, many years ago, I had a student from a very, very wealthy family. I mean, exceptionally wealthy. I tell you the name, you recognize it right away. And she tutored some cousins of mine who lived in that neighborhood. And they invited them to the Seder. And this family was a Sephardic family. He came from Holland, and she came from Germany. And their Seder was a black tie affair. They came to the Seder formally dressed. It was a very fancy house. In any event, this young boy, about 10 or 11, steals the afikomen. At the end of the meal, the host says, well, what would you like in order to get back the afikomen? The kid looks around. He says, how about a Picasso? He settled for a baseball uniform, but he knew where he was. In any event, great story. It's true. It really happened. So the Bible says, when your children will ask you, what's it all about? You have to tell them. And the Torah, the Bible tells us what it is you are to explain, how we left, what were the conditions there, and so forth. All these are biblical verses that are expounded upon in the Seder. And the text of the Seder is called the Haggadah. Haggadah means recitation. Many places have many different types of Haggadahs. There are, at least, without exaggeration, 10,000 different commentaries on the Haggadah. It is the most written about Jewish texts. There are ancient commentaries, there are modern commentaries, and they keep on coming out with more, especially now in English. There are so many commentaries. Different rabbis, Jonathan Sachs has a Haggadah, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin has a Haggadah. There are more traditional right-wing Haggadahs, there are left-wing Haggadahs, there are women's Haggadahs. There are all different types of Haggadahs available to accommodate whatever your particular level of interest in getting involved, or how long you want to make your Seder or not. It's a phenomenal experience if you've ever been to a Seder where people really have studied it in advance. You can't come to the Seder cold. You have to prepare. You have to understand interpretations and commentaries. How they got from 10 plagues to 250 plagues. Read the text. It's there. How did they do that? What were those 4 rabbis discussing all night long until their students had to come to remind them it's time for the morning prayer? They were so engaged in it. Maimonides, the great teacher, teaches us that even though the text of the Haggadah says we have to see ourselves as if we left Egypt ourselves, that's how involved you have to be in the process, Maimonides changes the word. His Haggadah says, you don't see yourself as if you left Egypt. You have to laharos, to demonstrate by doing all the different rituals associated. There's a very lovely Sephardic custom that I do with my grandchildren. I'll be able to see them this year, thank God. We take the matzah and we put it on our shoulders, and we wrap it up in one of the napkins, and we dance around the table. Because the Bible tells us when they were forced to leave Egypt, and they ran quickly before their bread could even rise. That's why we eat matzah.
Mm.
They wrapped it up in cloths and they ran. And I know Gail's going to get to the Seder table in a moment, but I just want to show you one thing before she does. Most people are familiar with the square matzahs that come in a box in your groceries. Okay? This is what a real matzah looks like. Not that the other isn't real matzah, but this is the matzah that people use in traditional homes at their Seder.
It's a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah to eat that.
Absolutely. But and it's, depending on how thin it is, it's very delicious if you like matzah. And we eat this all week long. Interestingly enough, though, the Sephardim and some Hasidim have a very thick matzah, almost like a lapa or a big piece of bread, which is very hard to make without becoming leavened. And the only problem with that, it doesn't stay fresh very long. You have to keep on making more. The matzahs that you buy in the store, they started making them in January. In any event, I'm going to stop here for a moment. There are a lot of symbols, and we act out a lot of parts to the Seder. I will end my section right now. I'll continue later on, perhaps. The number 4 is very important in the Seder. There are 4 languages of liberation that God promises Moses in the Bible. 4 languages. I'll take you out, I'll bring you out, I'll redeem you, and so forth. There are 4 cups of wine. There are 4 sons. There are 4 questions. Now, 4 is not limited. You can ask many, many more than 4, but there are 4 basic questions. But the number 4 is very important. And again, look at the commentaries. There are a lot of fascinating details to explain why the number 4 is so important. I will stop here. I'll continue at the end, whatever Gail may or Jan may leave out. But that's a little bit of an introduction. We eat the matzah because they rushed out of Egypt, and finally Pharaoh couldn't take it any longer, and he says, "Go already. I had enough of the place." And they ran out, and their bread wasn't even baked. They just took it and went. And from that point on, the Bible tells us, no leavening in your house all week long, only matzah or matzah product. And with that brief, very brief introduction, I will turn it over to Gail.
Well, thank you very much, Wally. That was excellent, perfect. I learned more things even yet. And that's the whole point of Passover. Every year you learn something new. So Wally was talking about the afikomen, and this particular piece of fabric is called a matzah tash. Well, tash is a Yiddish word for pocket, or, it's this fabric has 3 pockets in it. And in each pocket is a piece of matzah. And the leader of the Seder will tell you what to do with each piece. Will direct the Seder, but in here, he breaks one of these pieces of matzah in half and he hides it. And that's the afikomen. My father, when the kids were little, he would always hide it in the piano bench. And somehow the kids didn't find it until the end. I don't know why. And then later on, my parents, may they rest in peace, aren't here anymore. My father wasn't quite as tall. The taller guys, like my husband, they would hide it on top of the break front. And somehow the kid would figure it out and they'd say, "I think it's up there. I think it's up there." My middle niece from my middle brother, still in her 30s, loves to find the afikomen. It's just such a great tradition. And like Wally said, it's just, you can't really finish the Seder without the afikomen. And it's just, so these traditions continue through families. I wanted to show you a Seder table, not a facsimile, but the Seder table, the way it is. So this is my Seder table. I don't have a flower arrangement because I didn't want to be blocked. So this is the Seder table, the way it would be. We're celebrating freedom, like Wally said. So whatever level of things you have, for my parents, because they had everything taken from them, when I made a Seder, I wanted everything to be so nice for them. I actually made these napkins from scratch and sewed them, and I wanted everything to be the nicest. This is a pillow because one of the questions Jan will address is, on the Seder, you are supposed to be so relaxed because you're free. You're supposed to recline. I think my father said some Seders would take place actually they would move all the bedroom furniture and they would like really recline. You're supposed to recline. You're supposed to be so relaxed. So I used to put a pillow, when my father was leading the Seder, I would put a pillow on his chair just to signify that we were actually experiencing the Seder. We were reclining and we were relaxing. So this is the Seder plate. And upon this, we have the symbolic foods, which I will show you in a moment. So the bitter herbs this is the maror, and that's the bitter herbs, which we have to have because it has to be eaten. The Torah commands it. It's part of the Haggadah, of course, and it refers to the bitterness as that the Jewish people survived under Pharaoh. And we have a shank bone, which is the Paschal Lamb, that is called, I'm trying to see, I went out of order, Zora. We have charoset. Charoset is made out of apples and wine and nuts and put in cinnamon. And it's supposed to look like mortar, which is like the bricks and the mortar that was made by the Jews in their struggle as oppressed slaves under Pharaoh. But because the Jews were making it and because they're such a loving people, it's sweet and delicious. So you're going to see it in a little cup when I put all the stuff on here. But most mothers or people who are making the Seder make a big lot of it because everybody loves it. So we really, and some of the stuff is so bitter and everything, thinking of the bitterness that we suffered under Pharaoh, that we really welcome eating the charoset. The egg is supposed to look like a roasted egg, and that is called beitzah, and that's a hard-boiled egg, which is an integral part of the Jewish Seder meal, and it represents festive sacrifices, which were done in the days of the temple, and it kind of connects us to the mourning process. And also an egg I'll talk about in a moment, another part. Parsley is supposed to be indicative of spring, and lettuce is also supposed to be another bitter thing, which is karpas. I'm trying to see what they are. This was karpas. Sorry, parsley was karpas, and so we throughout the thing, salt water is supposed to be symbolic of the tears that were shed. And some people say the tears and also the sweat of the toil as slaves. And so there are moments where, now I'll show you the actual Seder plate. I have to put it on there. Right. So here we have the Seder plate. This is what a horseradish looks like. It's really a kind of, so if you get a really, really, really hot horseradish, it clears your whole sinuses up. It's amazingly hot. And depending on, I usually have David likes the horseradish because sometimes it is so firm. And if he doesn't have any mercy, you could, if the pieces are too big, your head could explode. But it's something you kind of look forward to. I don't know why.
even though it's kind of explosive, kind of, people are like, wow, that moror was like, whoa, and somehow you still like it anyway. And because you know why? Because you're experiencing it every time you experience it. And the Seder plate, every year you have the symbolic foods, and you experience that sensation. We go over the plagues that Wally was describing. In order to elicit our freedom, there were plagues, and which Moses was begging for our freedom. And one plague happened, another plague happened, like frogs, flies, boils, and Pharaoh wouldn't acquiesce. Locusts wouldn't acquiesce. One after the other, after the other, after the other. And finally, the slaying of the firstborn. The Passover came. Blood was put over the Jewish people's homes, and God passed over those homes and the Jews were able to leave Egypt. Now, we didn't want any of these things to happen. We would have just liked to leave. We wanted to leave. Moses asked, can we leave? Pharaoh wouldn't let us leave. They were in bondage for hundreds of years. So finally, God interceded, and finally we were able to leave. But during the Seder, there's a point where Dom is like blood. We feel bad about it. So there's a point during the Seder, and this is why I have this napkin here, where we take a little bit of wine and we name each plague. We say blood, vermin, frogs, names, and we all wine. We sacrifice a little bit of our wine to indicate that had it been any other way, had there been any other way, we would have preferred it. We really would not prefer to have plagues to elicit our freedom, but that's how it was. So that's what these little napkins are for. I put these little napkins so that, but we still acknowledge the fact that because of, you never lick your finger after that. That's what I have these for. So, and then in this bowl, before what we call the festive meal, we have an egg and salt water, and you eat them together. And it's for another reason that we never forget bitterness, because if you forget the bitterness, you really have no sympathy for people. And we always have sympathy for people. That's why our people are very good at raising money for underprivileged people, and why we have such sympathy for immigrants and stuff, because we were strangers in a strange land. And we were wandering through the desert. And we remember that every year. We remember what that was like. We remember bitterness. We eat the bitter herbs, and we remember how hard it was. And so when we eat that egg in the salt water, which, by the way, if you ate any time of the year, it wouldn't taste so good. But on Passover, when you eat that egg in the salt water, it tastes really good for those 2 nights. And that is to remember the destruction of the second temple in Jerusalem. We never forget it. We don't forget it when we get married, when the man breaks that glass after he says his vows, right before everybody says, yeah, you're married. The man breaks the glass, and that's to remember the destruction of the second temple. Because even at our happiest times, we have to remember there were bad times, and we have to always have sympathy for people who are going through bad times. So that's what happens. And then, my God, I fill up the table. There is not a speck of real estate left on this table. But I want to read to you, because of what my parents lived through. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and they lived through some really, 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 really bad times. And this is my favorite passage in the, that everybody reads from the Haggadah. Like Wally said, there's so many Haggadahs, Haggadot,
And this one was the Maxwell House before this session began. Jan and I were saying, it's very nice. We're a company, put out these Maxwell House Haggadahs, and everybody around knows this Maxwell House Haggadah. And it's not the best Haggadah, but we all know it, and they were free, and it's kind of sentimental. And this passage is really my favorite, and I feel like it's hopeful. And I think my father was going, and my parents, when they were going through concentration camps and stuff, I think now with the rise again of anti-Semitism, this is a hopeful passage. It says, and it is that promise which has been the support of our ancestors and of ourselves, for not only has risen up against us, but in every generation, some have arisen against us to annihilate us. But the most holy, blessed be he, always delivered us out of their hands. And this makes you know you have hope. All hope is not lost, that you can continue, that whatever you believe in, there's somebody looking out for you. And thousands of years ago when this was written, it had already happened a lot of times. And this is what I believe. And I just had one more thing I wanted to talk about before I pass it to Jan. Being that it's Women's Empowerment Month, Moses's big sister, Miriam, was one of the most amazing women. Miriam was the first woman prophet mentioned in the Torah. She cared for him from the time that he was placed in the river in his basket of reeds. She, like, look at what's going on today with the vaccinations. People are hesitant, and to think that you would have thousands and thousands of people who would think it's okay to pass through a parted sea, that's not so easy. But Miriam had her timbrels, which are like a tambourine. Miriam and her women, who were amazing women, they were midwives, and they had incredible standards and morals and ethics. And if you read more about them in the Bible, they were, I think most of them, they were not taking part of, if you saw the 10 Commandments and they did the golden calf, I think her women and none of them took part in that. And anyway, they, with their dancing, it's the first reference in the Torah to music, were able to, through their joyous ways, lead the people through the parted sea. And so, we really need to pay a great tribute to Miriam. And through their time in the, through the 40 years wandering, it was Miriam who had a very special well that is talked about in detail. And she provided, throughout the time that she was alive, she provided water for all the people wandering through the desert. So I'd like to, thought it was very important that we take a moment to pay tribute to the prophet Miriam, who is Moses' sister. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gail. That was a beautiful presentation, and as beautiful as your beautiful Passover Seder table. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Thank you. So I'm going to go through what was referenced to earlier, one of the important fours of the Seder, one of the very, very important parts of tonight's Seder, and that is are the 4 questions. But before I go into the actual questions, I'd just like to explain that, and this is very, very important, this is a tradition. If there are children present at the table, at the Seder table, it's traditional that the youngest child who's capable of chanting the questions is given the honor of asking them. That's a very important tradition that we hold. And then after the child asks the question one by one, then the leader of the Seder responds with the question's answer. So having said that, I will start with the questions. And I too am reading from the Maxwell House Haggadah that Gail mentioned. Okay, so the first question is pertaining to how is this night different than any other night? On all other nights, we eat chametz and matzah. Why on this night only matzah? So the child would ask that question, chant that question, and then the leader of the Seder might say, and I'm saying might say, because Dr. Wally Green, Rabbi Dr. Wally Green explained to you that there are thousands of variations of Haggadahs, which I'm going to get back to again in a moment. But one answer might be, any other night we may eat either leavened or unleavened bread, but on this night we only eat unleavened bread. Second question might be, on all other nights we eat all vegetables. Why on this night only maror? And the answer might be, all other nights we may eat any spices of herbs, but this night only bitter herbs. And Gail explained a bit of why, the bitterness of the Exodus. The third question might be, on all other nights, we don't dip even once. Why on this night do we dip twice? And we, on all other nights, we do not dip even once, but on this night, twice. And then fourth, on all other nights, we eat either sitting upright or reclining. Why on this night do we all recline? Which Gail told us a wonderful little family story about that. And again, on this night, all of us recline. And going back to Rabbi Dr. Wally Green saying there are so many Haggadahs, I have a Haggadah I'd like to read a section from about the 4 questions. And I'm reading from something I received from 2004. It was a special Seder that I was invited to, a special model Seder for women as seen through the eyes of the Baghdadi Jews of India. And they start by how different this night is from other nights. Parents will relate to this. On many nights, we may get tired of our children's questions. When are we going to get there? Do I have to eat that? Do I have to do that? Why? Well, tonight is very different. Parents don't get tired of questions tonight. Tonight, we want our children to ask as many questions as possible. So this Haggadah presents 4 new questions, which are could also be taken as a way to invite further and more in-depth conversation about what happened to the Jews, the exiles and the maror, and why are we doing the things we do? Such as, here are 4 new questions that they propose in this Haggadah. It says, why do we sometimes feel like slaves, even though we are free? What kind of things happen in the world that are bitter, like maror? What can we do to sweeten those things that are happening in the world now? Would our lives be better if our lives were plain and simple, like unleavened matzah, which, by the way, takes about 1.5 minutes to cook if it's in the right oven? how can we dip, again, dipping, how can we dip ourselves, how can we dip into ourselves and give to other people from inside ourselves? How can we give to other people to make their lives better? So that's food for thought from another variation of a wonderful Haggadah that was presented to me back in 2004. Thank you.
If I could just conclude, there's so much more to talk about. I will mention that an integral part of the Seder is when we open the door to greet Elijah the prophet. Elijah is said to initiate the process of the ultimate redemption. He will bring the Messiah. And it's customary at the Seder, despite the fact that we are now free, we're not slaves anymore, we were slaves, now we're free men. Nevertheless, we open the door and we greet Elijah the prophet. Hopefully, he'll bring the redemption. It's a fascinating insight because the same day of the week, Tisha B'Av comes out. Tisha B'Av commemorates the destruction of both temples in Jerusalem. The same day of the week, Monday night or Tuesday, whatever night of the week it is the same night every year that Passover occurs. So we go from destruction to redemption as part of the service as well. The last thing I want to say is that if you look at the Haggadah and the whole Seder experience and everything that's done and all the symbols and all the rituals, you'll find two contradictory ideas fighting with each other. Many symbols represent slavery. Many symbols represent freedom. And we're constantly bringing one up against the other. Because ultimately we hope that whatever slavery that we are currently in, and there's many different forms of slavery, as Dan indicated, we hope to be freed from them. One of my rabbis, many, many years ago, used to give an ethical discussion before Passover, and just like we get rid of all the chametz in our home, we get rid of all the leavening, put away all the bread, get rid of all the cookies, all the leaven that we have in our house, we get rid of it, we should also get rid of that leaven within us, the chametz within us, that which puffs us up, that which makes us haughty or conceited. All the negative characteristics that we have should also be gotten rid of as we enter into the Passover season. So these are some insights into Passover. There's much, much more, and we could spend the whole night as we do at the Haggadah. I'll just give you one thing, and then I'll shut up. Last year, unfortunately, I was alone with my wife for the Seder. And it wasn't unfortunate. I love my wife. Happy to be. But we were not with family, not with children, not with grandchildren. But the two of us had a Seder together, without being rushed, without being pressured, without worried about this being, that being ready or taking care of this kid's needs. We went until about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning each night in discussion, in questions, and answering. We had about 5 or 6 different Haggadahs on the table. Now, on my shelf, I must have at least 50 or 60 different commentaries on the Haggadah. And each one brings something new. It's a renewable experience, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of an inkling as to what the Passover Seder is all about. Thank you for your patience.
Wonderful. So I want to end with something we discussed. There's a song in the Haggadah called Dayenu. And Dayenu is really good because what Wally discussed about, thank you, Wally, because really it's so much insight. And Wally brought this up that we're so grateful in this holiday. And what Wally was saying that we need things for kids to do to cheer them up. And this song, I'm just going to play the song for a little bit of this recording of this song I have from about 10 years ago from my nephew's daughter at the Seder table. We're so excited when a new child learns a song. And what the song is saying is, had God brought us all out from Egypt, that would be enough. Dayenu means like enough. Had God given us all the Sabbath, remember I told you the Sabbath is the most holy day. If God had just given us the Sabbath, the ability to worship again, that would be enough. Had God given us the Torah, that would have been enough. There's actually 15 verses, but we are singing Dayenu, like that would have been enough. Like we're so grateful for what he had given us. And we sing this song, Dayenu.
Yay! Yay!
And that's the spirit of it, that everybody is so happy and joyous when we sing Dayenu, that it's like, it would have been enough if God only gave us this and this, but God gave us so much, and God gives us so much. And when we sing Dayenu at the table, year after year after year, and now, I mean, that was my nephew when he sang it when he was a baby. And I remember when I was a little girl and I sang it, and I just, that's the cool thing about it. We year after year after year, and for thousands of years, we've been celebrating this from ancient times. And these songs, like they just, in all different languages, we've heard Dayenu in so many languages. When you hear it sung in another language, it takes your breath away because you can't believe it. You've sung it in Yiddish, or you've sung it in Hebrew and English. And when you hear it in another language and you hear the same spirit, Wally, don't you feel that? It makes you feel so filled with joy that our little people of maybe close to 15 million in the whole world, less than 1.2 of 1% of the world population, still has so much joy that we're here and we're continuing our traditions, and that's what it's all about. And we do our best. We bring out our best wine, our best kosher wine. This wine company is called Yayin, Y-A-Y-I-N, which is the Hebrew word for wine. So now there's so many great wineries in Israel, kosher wineries, and we really try and buy the wine from these great wineries and make it great and make it make it interesting, and that's how we feel. And I thank you so much for I thank all of you for being interested to see how we celebrate our holiday of Passover. I thank Wally so much for adding so much to my knowledge of Passover, even though my father taught me a lot, and my mother taught me a lot about the traditions as well. And all I've learned as a Berry Fellow and stuff. And Jan, that you contributed, and I was really, it was an honor for me to share with you this afternoon. And I hope everybody has great holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think in closing, we would like to invite Father Phil.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, and I will say the line that every Seder I've been to, they say as we're leaving the door, next year, Jerusalem.
Amen.
Maybe it would be a wonderful thing for all of us one year to be in Jerusalem together at Passover, to celebrate the brotherhood and sisterhood we share, the gift we have from each other, and the gift of life God has given us. Thank you for your wonderful sharing. Thank you for your gift today. I would remind everybody that our next one is on April 6th, when the Baha'i community will share about Ridvan with us. So Sean, we're looking forward to hearing this and being educated about the event. Adam, thank you for having Peace Islands host us again. And why don't you close us all out now?
Sure. Well, thank you, Father Phil. Well, everyone, thank you again for joining us today for the World's Religious Traditions program. And we would like to thank to our speakers, presenters today, Gail, Jen, and Rabbi Wally Green for their great, insightful presentation. Happy Passover to all of our Jewish friends and community members. And in final, I would like to add that, recently, unfortunately, there have been a lot of violent extremist events happening all around the world, unfortunately. And what has been happening against Asian community, it is unacceptable, unfortunately, and we are very saddened by all these attacks. And what they say is knowing is the first step of loving. So if you know a person, it is great to get together to know each other as different communities, as a very diverse society. So let's get together more often to get to know each other, to at least help out each other and our community to help to reduce those stereotypes have been populated throughout different sources, unfortunately, with all these hate rhetorics. So let's work all together, continue working all together, and pray to stop those hate and hateful attacks. Thank you, everyone, again. We will looking forward to see you on April 6th at 4:30 for the Baha'i tradition presentation. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
That was
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you,
Passover.
It
everyone.
was wonderful.
Happy
Thank you.
Passover.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Happy
Happy
Passover.
great.
Thank you.
Passover.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Welcome.
Thank you,
Very nice
everybody.
presentation. Very
Oh,
nice.
thank you. Thank
Passover,
you.
everyone.
Happy Passover to everyone.
Thank you.
Passover to everyone.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
you made
Thank
me.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, you made me
Bye,
hungry.
Bye-bye, Jody.
Oh.